Your master's evolution represents your own internal state.
心の現れ
Our internal state? So Agumon is a reflection of how I feel, which does drive back into the actual lore of Digimon of when it comes to tamers or chosen children and their partners. So depending on each iteration, it all comes down to how a person is feeling and their emotional state at the time, which will determine if one dark evolves or they actually evolve into the next form. A perfect example of this is when Taichi and Agumon, they were so mad when Taichi was so overwhelmed with so much anger, he made Agumon dark evolve to Skull Greymon. Or when from Savers, and where Agumon dark evolved into what is it? Black Shining Greymon or something like that? When the Marcus was very angry at Thomas. So that wouldn't necessarily be true. So the way dark evolution works is you would need to have a very they go by positive emotions and negative emotions. So like just because you're angry doesn't necessarily mean your Digimon would dark evolve. It's more that someone who is filled with so much hate, so much negative emotions, who are what they call unstable, as the professor is saying, would trigger a dark evolution. So like another example would be like Matt. He was filled with in Digimon Adventures, he was filled with so much negative thoughts. He went from teetering between being a good guy and a bad guy, but he was never went to the dark side. He was just always conflicted by himself. He was always angry. He was always unsure about himself to the point where Cherrymon made him turn him against his friends, but his Digimon never dark evolved like at all. He never got to the point in where like he was filled with that much negative emotions to the point where he was turning away from what they call the positive side or the light side. The same thing can also be said with Ken. His Digimon never dark evolved, despite the fact that Ken was pretty much being corrupted the whole time. If Ken ever probably had his Digimon evolve, it's very likely, but then like for the fact that he was corrupted, it would have prevented Wormwood from probably evolving at all. So it really depends on how you look at it. Building a close relationship should prevent negative evolutions. A close relationship, huh? Should a Kimigami be mishandled, their master will ultimately pay the price. The inner state of the human they protect, their partner. This is what determines the fate of each Kimigami and human pair. So, this would explain Suji's situation. So, for those who remember, or for those who weren't here, in the previous episode, or even before this, Suji did not trust Lopmon. He was afraid of him. He saw him as weak. He saw him as someone that couldn't protect him. So they did not have a close relationship since the beginning, to the point where by the time it came to the arc where Aruken was giving them illusions, Lopmon wanted to protect him, but because he couldn't evolve, Suji saw him as something lesser. Like he saw him as himself when he was younger, because he too was being, I wouldn't say he was being abused by his father, but more like his father saw him as worthless, saw him as unreliable because he couldn't be as good as his brother. He couldn't meet his father's expectations. which is something that's pretty common if you look at other animes in Japanese. But like, yeah, it's one of those expectations that he couldn't meet it, so the father like pretty much abandoned the family, and that stayed with Suji. Again, that would not be necessarily true, Al. If you had a close relationship with your partner, as the professor was saying, it wouldn't necessarily trigger a dark revolution. Because like you can get, just because you had a disagreement doesn't mean it will trigger dark revolutions. And regardless if you had a poor emotional control, that wouldn't necessarily trigger a dark revolution either. So like a dark revolution is usually triggered if you have very, very, very negative emotions. So like usually when it comes to Digimon pairing, not all Digimon and human partners are the same. They're not like, as the professor said, they're like reflect. So like some Digimon pairings, they're complete opposite. Some of them could be similar but not completely the same, but they are meant to balance each other out. So if theoretically, if we said you had a Digimon partner, since you have poor emotional control, you would most likely get a Digimon who would help balance that emotional control. Now, to say that if you got to one of the moments where you felt very negative and stuff like that, I wouldn't trigger Dark Evolution. It's more like he or she would probably try to help you with that emotional control. They'll probably more or less try to help balance it out. And then like at one point, they might actually get to a point in where that could be used to help with the evolution process. Not necessarily dark evolution, because dark evolution is when you have very, 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 very bad negative emotion, no positive emotions at all. So it's pretty much that. So like it does also come down to the relationship. If you have a very poor relationship, like next to no relationship to your Digimon partner, then that essentially would trigger a dark evolution, which will happen with Suji and Lopmon. It got to the point in where the reason Lopmon dark evolved was because essentially Suji was kicking him. He was yelling at him. It got to the point because there was no relationship at all. Because throughout the entire game, he was mistreating him. He was yelling at him. He was making him feel inferior. So to that point, Lopmon felt like he kept trying to help Suji, but Suji kept pushing him away. And then it got to the point where Suji pretty much was abusing him to that point. And that's why he dark evolved, because there was no relationship. Suji's negative emotions led to Lopmon dark evolving. As I said, it's like a mirror. But like if you don't have that relationship, it'll be hard for the Digimon to balance out the negativity. So it's like that.